So welcome everyone to Voices with Vervaeke. I'm joined again by my good friend and one of my favorite interlocutors, Jordan Hall. And so welcome, Jordan. It's great to have you here again.
Yeah, sorry for missing a little bit. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
So what we were talking about before
Yeah.
we started recording was some period of time ago, maybe in the middle of this year, I put some work into a very short document just talking about the sacred and the profane.
Mm-hmm.
And you and Chris actually helped me on that.
Yeah.
And I published it just to get some feedback because it's going to be, for me, I think it may actually be very close to the bottom of the religion that's not a religion.
Yes.
And the kind of the commitments or the kind of the codes or agreements that are involved in being part of civium.
Mm.
And I got, frankly, a lot of good feedback, but one of the areas that I noticed was how do I say this right? Like what's the right word? It's almost like a squishiness or I can't remember. What's it called? You have, like when you stand up and you lose your balance.
Vertigo,
like a vertigo around the notion of the concept of the sacred in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like that we have lost as a culture the meaning of that concept.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there's lots of questions about that. And it reflects a lot of the conversations that you and I have had,
Very
things
much.
like
Very much.
The mistaken association, like for example, I've also used the word ethos.
Yep.
And I noticed that in the vernacular, ethos maps to the phrase code of ethics.
Yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, that is precisely wrong. Like it's an act of theft to steal ethos from embodied livingness and endeavor to simulate it in what would otherwise be known as creed or credo.
Yeah. Very much.
Right?
Very much.
And so, when we first got on this call, it's like, hey, this is something I think we should talk about. I think the reinventing of the sacred is like ready and important. And then you came back with, oh, I'm way ahead of you, buddy. So,
well, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm way ahead of you, but I'm really this is very central and prominent and pressing in my thinking at all times. I think the reinventio of the sacred is perhaps the central project. I mean, I think you're right. You called it the bottom. I think it's the bottom of the foundation, the fount. I like fount better than foundation. It's the fount for the religion that's not a religion, and this has a lot to do with. I would argue. In fact, I propose a way of potentially reinventio of the sacred, and around the idea of sort of a set of phenomenological properties and functional properties. And so the phenomenological properties have to do with getting that optimal grip between the mysterious moreness and the mysterious suchness, so that we feel deeply connected to an inexhaustible source, an inexhaustible fount of intelligibility that always is beyond, but always is affording the evolution of our relevance realization of our religio. That's sort of that's my way. And then, of course, the functional aspect of that is that it is precisely the space in which we grow the fundamental framing that makes us cognitive agents, and ultimately makes us capable of being persons within a community of people. And so that's the model of the sacred. And then it ties up with things that you and I have talked about replacing faith, the notion of faith as belief, with with that creative continuity of contact, and also giving up on the idea of perfectionism or finality in that, rather the idea again of the continuity rather than completeness. And so making the Godelian deal as we're not going to pursue completeness anymore. We're going to pursue a kind of consistency, a fluency, a continuity of contact. And then we compared that to the faithfulness.
And a directionality.
Yes. Yeah, well,
we use the phrase reciprocal opening versus reciprocal
narrowing, and we've and in
narrowing,
connection we've talked about the evolution of evolvability, and we've talked about, that the sacred is the place in which we often do the serious play of, through symbolization, of re-exapting the machinery, so that it evolves and we actually evolve our evolvability. And that idea about, from what's his name, Gilbert Owen, on that new idea about the ability to evolve is itself a trait that can evolve.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to drop a few things in here.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot, but
one,
that's the constellation that's sort of swimming for me right now.
So this is one of those times where I'm like, oh, that's a lot. And I think I just reached, I'm like full. So let's just slow down and like digest for a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I took too big of a bite of it was a nice cookie, but I just got too much in my mouth. So one of the things that I've been puzzling over is I'd like to do a little diagnostics.
Yeah.
Because I noticed that there seems to be kind of a fundamental move that has a set of characteristics that is sort of close to many of the things that are wrong or broken.
Right, right.
And oddly enough, I noticed that Nietzsche, I think, was one of the first persons who did this diagnosis, but I'm not going to use his language because it's too flowery.
Yeah.
So you called out one piece of this move. I don't know if you called it out precisely as part of the move, but you called out the moment in history where this happens, and that's the invention of the notion of the supernatural.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna identify, I think, 3 or 4 pieces to the move, and I'll see if I can hold it in continuity.
Yep.
Right, so one piece is the conceptual imagination of a notion called the supernatural. Right? So I'm now taking nature and I'm dividing it. Right? What once had wholeness, what once was a whole, I'm now actually dividing. One part now is called nature. Another part is called supernature, and they are distinguished. There's an analytical distinction. There's a severing between them. Then I'm going to load a bunch of content into this category, the supernatural, including the sacred and faith, lots of other stuff, which is actually, I think, quite important stuff, but I'm putting it up there. And I think perhaps legitimately, originally, under the heading of, let's put important stuff in this category, like super meaning like really important, like awesome. And then though, what happens is we enter some stage where the category of the supernatural becomes mapped to bullshit.
Yes.
It becomes the category of the supernatural becomes mapped to bullshit. And so therefore everything that was put into that category now is also mapped to bullshit, and you lose it completely. Like you just like literally like the sacred is a null set. It has no content.
That's right.
All right. So that's one piece. And my proposal is that whole move was an error. The separation, the division, the analytical distinction between nature and supernature was the first moment of the error, and it was guaranteed, for reasons that I can describe but I don't think are useful, to end up with being empty and therefore. Second is something that you've talked about also at length, which is the what do you call it, the inversion of relevance and propositional. So participatory and propositional knowing. And then again, the forgetting or elision of participatory and its replacement with the simulacrum of participatory in proposition. So propositional knowing takes itself to be the whole.
Yes. Yep. Very much.
These two moves, I think, are very closely related.
That's what I have argued too. Yes.
Yep. Okay. The third, and again, in some sense, I'm almost saying the same thing multiple different ways. The third, I have to actually draw the picture and then see if I can say it in words.
Okay.
What I see is, so imagine you've got a torus. Okay. And then to maybe even make it very sort of simple, imagine that you have an actual physical torus, like a small inflatable, like children's toy for a pool, right?
Right. Yep.
And then you've got a sheet, like a bed sheet. And so you take the torus and you put the bed sheet over, and then you lift the torus up, right? So you've got a shape of a torus underneath the membrane, and then the membrane has kind of a coning down. Okay. And the continuity of context. So the torus image here has to do with something like, the aspect of the infinite that is domained. It's what happens when you take the infinite and you make it finite.
Mm-hmm.
The finitization, the propositional construct, the paradigmatic, the naming. You take the Tao and you name it.
Yes.
Right. So that's the torus. The torus is the naming of the Tao. It's the point at which we, for the reasons that have to do with being able to do math with numbers, as a mathematician once told me, something you got to do. Right? You have to make a renormalization of infinities until you can actually have some kind of construct that you can begin to operate with in finite ways.
Yeah, it's the core of calculus.
The core of calculus, the absolute core of calculus. And I actually called it that thing earlier about the taking of the propositional as the participatory.
Yeah.
I've also called that the Leibnizian error.
Yeah.
Which is the taking of the limit as x approaches infinity as infinity.
Yes.
It's a very useful tool for building bridges and rockets. It's not the map is not the territory. It's not good ontology. There you go. Very well put. All right. So that third move is this notion of the same basic idea, which is the necessary contact between the infinite and the finite.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that if continuity of contact between the finite domain and the infinite is broken, dedication of the finite domain, meaning that
your sound cut out there for a sec.
Oh,
what did you
sorry.
say? That's okay. You said I got if the continuity of contact between the infinite and the finite, and then you went silent just for a sec.
Is broken.
Right.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. If that's broken, and very similar to like your fount.
Yeah.
And what you and me and Greg talked about in terms of like fractal continuity.
Yep.
When that is severed, what you end up getting is you get a local optimum. Like it's possible to now you have this image. It's a utopianization.
Yeah.
It's a snapshot of a moment as if it is real, as if it's eternal. Like it's you get rid of evolvability in favor of optimization. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. You get rid of evolvability in exchange for optimization, and you begin to run optimization on the finite, but at the cost of severing its relevance, severing its grounding in the deeper context of the whole of the real, and therefore, by the way, at the cost of it becoming fragile. Like it is now at this point guaranteed to die. It enters into thermodynamic closure, right? It's a closed system, and therefore it will eventually reach death, equilibrium.
Sure.
And I think all three of these stories are different ways of looking at the same basic problem. Like they're all very connected to each other.
I agree.
Okay.
So I just on the last point, I often, in order to capture that optimization, but also ending and the finite being mistaken for the infinite, I often use the term finalization or final solution with the definite allusions intended.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So
and perfectibility, things like that.
Yeah. So the three things, and I think they're all right. Let's just quickly. I just want. So we've got the supernaturalization of the two worlds mythology, right? And then we've got propositional tyranny, and then we've got finalization. Those are the three things. Are those fair enough terms? And because those are just sort of the language I've been using around these three
sounds
things.
Good. I like them.
Okay. So we're in agreement. I'm in agreement with you that I think these are central. So it might be good to think about each one, maybe initially individually, and then try to like sort of unpack each, and then that will enrich our ability to find deeper connections between them. That's what I'm proposing as a method right now for going forward.
Nice. I'm with you.
Okay, so the idea about, and you're right, it's going to be hard to keep them separate because they so interpenetrate and interafford and constrain each other. But the idea of the supernaturalization of the two worlds mythology, and this has to do, I think, also, I mean, So I'm having all these amazing discussions right now with people like Paul Vanderklay and Mary Cohen and Jonathan Pajot and J.P. Marceau. They're all Christians and they're all deeply intrigued. And I even see Paul, I can see the influence because he's now becoming very critical of Cartesian dualism and how it has undermined, right? And so what I'm saying is there's a genuine appreciation behind the conversation. It's genuine dialogue, and I appreciate it. But what I see we're banging into is, I think it's viable, and I think you do too, and not only viable, but needed, that we can uncouple the sacred from the supernatural. Because and the reason is exactly it's the Nietzschean Heideggerian critique. You make this dualism, and then what you do is you absolutize the difference such that no relation is actually possible. And then the supernatural goes from being that which impregnates the world with meaning and intelligibility to being something that, given the intelligibility of the world, is absurd and makes no sense. And it becomes, as you said, bullshit. But Nietzsche's point, and then Heidegger, and then blew it up into his whole philosophy of history, is, as you said, if we make this world only the preliminary platform for perfection, we make it the preliminary platform for perfection, and then it has no value in and of itself. It is only instrumentally valuable. And then once we lose what we were supposed to, right, the perfection as a real possibility for us, because when things become absurd, you can still believe them. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of viability. Most people I've been checking in on all this recent research, millennials are leaving their established religion, not because they don't believe it or they become atheists, because they find it irrelevant. It makes no real connection to how they're making sense of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so once you do that, then you've got the fundamental grammar of nihilism. That's the Nietzschean Heideggerian hypothesis. It's like you make this, right, a preliminary platform for your pilgrimage to the perfection that is, completely discontinuous with it. And then when you give up on that, imagine there's no heaven, as John Lennon famous said, right? Then you're left with this valueless thing because you turned it, you schematized it as something that only has instrumental value. Yep. And that to me is deeply dysfunctional, because let's say there never was that supernatural domain, which I think is the case, right? Then there must have been other stuff that people were actually interacting with in this world that was actually giving them the enhanced religio, the enhanced connectedness, the enhanced overcoming of foolishness, the enhanced wisdom. And so the problem is the nihilistic product of the supernaturalization of the two worlds mythology schools us into believing that meaning can't be found here, when it probably always was found here. And so I think that for me is the problematic. And what I'm seeing, the difficulty is the point at which, I mean, it's not we're not butting heads, but the point where we're really pushing the limits of dialectic is, how do you sever the sacred from the supernatural? So you were nodding as I sort of ran through my version of the Nietzschean Heideggerian argument and why I think it's so very pernicious. And I've been trying to figure out what's the connection. One of the connections is it's a Habermasian thing. It's a discourse move. And I saw this in the debate between Jordan Peterson and Ronnie D'Souza. I know both of them, about the sacred, right? And what D'Souza did, he won the debate in the first 4 minutes, and Jordan was just, right, he was just struggling thereafter, because he got Jordan to agree to this definition. The sacred is that which cannot be put into question. And see, that's one of the things. Why would you want that? Because that makes it an unquestionable authority.
Well,
for
what's
your
crazy
life.
is also that's exactly the inverse. It is 180 degrees the other direction.
Exactly, exactly. So that's why you see what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at why this move is so difficult, because in just like you said, it's 180 from what you and I are trying to articulate. You see, right now I'm
The
trying to get
sacred is that which calls forth the most meaningful questions.
yes, yes,
Right,
right.
is the orienting basis that allows you to be able to discover and go deeper and deeper into the most meaningful questions. It's actually what allows you to make a distinction between the less and the more meaningful questions. Right, the sacred is that drawing in, that
Yeah.
pulling forth. Questioning is the essence of it.
Yes, but notice, right, that you and I, and this is a very Platonic thing to do, although Plato has messed us up with his ideas of perfection, right? But there's this idea that, the Socratic idea that wonder and awe are part of the essential, like, phenomenology and functionality of the sacred. But what happens if one of the things that supernaturalization gives for you, right? And it's what Ronnie did in the debate is once Jordan just sort of agreed with that. And the fact that somebody as insightful as Jordan just agreed with that, right, tells me that that's such a pervasive conceptualization that somebody who's got a much more nuanced and critical relationship with the Christian framework, often very insightful, the way he just agreed to that, because I remember watching it and I go, no, that's wrong. And then that was he lost the debate. Right. And I don't mean in terms of popularity, because that's not what's going on. It's like,
I have an image of the Queen's Gambit in my head. Like,
yeah,
there's
exactly.
a chess move and the game's over.
Yeah. Games or that.
So
The Seven Samurai, even before he draws the sword, he said, "You lost." Right.
You lost. Yeah.
So
one of the moves.
One of
the moves. So let's use our concepts. So there's the tyranny of the propositional raises its ugly head here. Right.
Yeah.
Which in many ways is also the tyranny of the nominative.
Yes.
Right. And the tyranny of the third person perspective.
Yes.
Which is very closely related to that notion of the snapshot or the freezing in time, the separation from continuity of contact with evolvability, with livingness, with that which is in fact intrinsically change. Right. There's the notion that I can say what's like if I'm sitting on a landscape and like, okay, what's sacred? The idea that I can point at something. And there is some object, there is some objectivity, there is some thingness, which is per se, which is sacred, right?
Yes.
I pick up some kind of, a cross or a rock, and like that's sacred, yeah. And in distinction to other things that are like it, the nominativeness of it. Like let's just go with a cathedral. This cathedral is sacred, or a giant statue of Buddha that is sacred. Okay.
Yes.
And the proposition that I would make in fencing with the tyranny of the propositional is to make a move into the first person, to make a move into livingness. And also to notice that you can talk about what I would say is maybe that the sacred is much closer to a process. And it's a process that has this notion of reciprocal opening, right? That there's a interior subjective and an exterior objective, and relationship between the two move, right? So it's, if I say like, sitting in a moment with my newborn daughter and having a deep, deep felt sense of the meaningfulness of life, like and the tragedy and joy of it, right? Sitting and looking into her eyes and feeling her growing old and living and dying, and noticing in my own living and dying, like all like that, like the lifeness, and feeling that in that moment, okay? And there's a characteristic, like the notion of care. And carefulness is intrinsically tied to the concept of the sacred. Right? Being what does it mean for something to be sacred? Well, one of the things that it means is that you want to take care of it. You want to be careful. And I mean, like don't make a lot of noise. Don't step on. Don't throw trash on. Don't fuck up. Right? Don't profane, which literally just means to disrupt the integrity of the moment of the thing. Now, what happens though is that if I'm in this moment, there's an interior, right, to orient myself in the direction to be able to discern how to take proper care. Think about how complicated what I just said was. Right? I have to discern what propria is, like what is propriety, what is proper in this moment. I have to discern in myself how to actually orient myself such that I can respond in that way, right? How do I actually arrange in myself the capacity to maneuver in a way that is elegantly and not clumsily stomping about in the directionality of what is appropriate?
Yes.
And I have to actually be able to continually refine my discernment in both of these directions. Okay. And that's
Yeah.
all happening. All three of those things are happening in my interior in relationship with the exterior.
Sure.
And the exterior gives me a mirror, right? If I actually am doing a good job at this, right? If I'm listening, if my relevance realization is guiding me skillfully into
Yeah.
closer continuity of contact with this moment, the event, right? Not the place,
Yeah.
not the snapshot in time. I don't want to take a finite snapshot and try to freeze it and say that's sacred. What I say is the
Yeah.
unfoldingness of it, right? The livingness of it, that by virtue of living into it more fully and more deeply and more skillfully with higher discernment of what is appropriate in relationship to it, and in my own discovering in myself my own capacities to become more open to it and more capable of living in it, then I actually increase my capacity to do so. Like I am growing in relationship to into the moment.
Yeah.
And of course, by treating the moment with care and carefulness, I'm also growing the moment. I'm growing whatever it is, right? Whatever the sacredness of that moment, whatever, how do I say this? Not the sacredness, whatever the characteristics of the moment happen to be. In this case,
Mhm.
I am in relationship with my daughter and able to sort of find out how to be a better parent, for example, and to create a better context for the unfolding of this singular soul in world.
Mhm.
Um, and therefore to maintain openness, reciprocal opening. I'm actually creating more possibility of deeper and richer events of this kind. Right? I can have a more and more livingness with more skillfulness and richness in more and more contexts as a result of that. And in this case, the growing up of the child and the
Yeah.
growing up of myself. Yeah. And this is true. Like, I have I walk to a beautiful mountain and I see a clear stream.
Yeah.
And if I'm able to feel in myself that notion of appropriateness,
Yeah.
there's again a tuning in myself, which by the way has an evolutionary, like old-fashioned scientific hardcore, oh, clean water is a good thing vibe, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, and also notice, for example, let's not dump toxins in the water because that is profane, which is simply say it disrupts the integrity of the virtue of the context that I deeply know and notice should in fact be held in integrity. Um, so there's something like about things like thrivingness
Yes.
and
Flourishing.
flourishing that are like surround or dance with the notion of the sacred
Very, very much.
fundamentally. Okay, ball back.
Well, this is a lot. So the idea of the sacred, I mean, some of the etymologies say it's like putting sort of like a fence around something. And that was I agree with you. I think that was originally about trying to care for the integrity of it. That's what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then it became more and more. No, you're not allowed to go in there. And and there's been close associations, and we've been reflecting on this at least since Freud, between the sacred and the taboo, right? They're both things we put these fences around, but plausibly for different reasons. Um, but they're very closely associated with each other, and then and that has to do with the idea that God is numinous. He's both that which is sacred, but that which is also threatening, and then you have to sort of balance
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
off
Mm-hmm.
against each other, and so there's a complex phenomenology around it, I think. So, but I think this idea, and you put the two together. If you remember, you said care, that's and then being careful, right? That's the two sides of it, right? That's the two
Mm-hmm.
sides. And the way Chris and I have tried to discuss that, building on the works of Otto, who's behind this conversation, and Geertz, is the idea that the sacred has to have this bidirectional functionality to it. It has to be that which homes us, that by which we can gather together and care for the integrity of the world. But it also has to be that which takes us to the horizon of horror, because it also has to be that which affords us to leave home when we need to.
Yep.
But the point, and then you think of Plato's cave and all the grain mess. The point of leaving home, though, is so that you can recover home when you return, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like Tolkien's recovery theory of fantasy. The point of going to the alternative world is like an anthropologist, right? You go to the other world, you get enculturated, you afford the deep perspectival and participatory transformation, so that when you come back to this world, your home, you see it anew, you recover it. That's how he justified and explained what he thought things like the Lord of the Rings was doing. And so for me, what religions did was they created imaginal worlds, or that allow us to augment our reality. They take us out, they expose us to the horizon of the other, of horror, but in a way so that we can recover this world. We can come back and see this world more deeply. And see, so everything you were just saying, I agree with, but what I'm trying to get at is, I think there's a move, and I think that the sacred isn't in me or in the thing. I mean, Socrates criticizes both. He criticizes the sophists who try to give the third person impersonal definition of virtue, and he criticizes the people that just speak from first person intuition. And he proposes, of course, the second person as the place in which you will find the logos, right? And so I'm trying to put two things together. So just give me one more minute, and I want to hear what you have to say. I think like what's happening between you and your daughter and you and the stream is that kind of, like you said, it's transjective, it's the reciprocal opening, but that is also bound up with this other move of the sacred, whereby we go out to the imaginal world so that we can come back and recover the world that we are in. And the reason why I say that is because I think part of what's going on in people not wanting to let go of the supernatural is they need the imaginal world, right, in order to recover the depths of this world. That's not how they understand it. And I'm being presumptuous. I'm presuming to tell them what's going on in their own functionality, which has tremendous hubris with it, but I'm bringing it up for discussion here. Yeah, it's like, what I'm proposing to you is think about how people can come very close, maybe completely, finding the Lord of the Rings sacred, right? Because they can do this, they can do that thing. It's like augmented reality. They put on this fictional world, and through it, they can see more deeply. So I said, I'm trying to propose, as opposed to the two worlds, the trans world of this world, that we're always, transcending further and further into it, rather than going to the other world. And why I think people, they don't want to lose all the imaginal stuff that allows them to recover the depth of that reciprocal opening that you were describing before. See, I'm trying to say that in addition to what was happening with you and your daughter, right, which I believe is completely sufficient for you, right? But I think a lot of people need the imaginal, and I'm not saying they have a crutch or there's anything wrong. They need the imaginal stuff in order to recover the eyesight to see and to be in the reciprocal opening. That's what I'm proposing to you.
I'm with you. Let me see if I can tease apart some of the things that I think I'm hearing. So one, just even in the simplest, is just to notice the proposition that the imaginal is real.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, I would imagine is prosaic, and yet of course has always been quite problematic.
Yeah.
What is this thing that I can't weigh it? How much does it weigh? Well, I don't know. There's no way of weighing it. It's certainly not material, right? It's not physical, and yet it's real. Right? That's been a classic conundrum.
Yes.
And the demoralization, or the creation and demoralization of the supernatural, carries with it the problematic of that.
Yes.
But also, I think the other piece of what I was hearing, and I think this feels quite right, because you kept doing like this maneuver, is in fact just like the real separation, right? It's almost like render unto the imaginal what is imaginal, and render unto the real what is real, but do not connect them, right? It creates this sort of this sense of abstraction, of perfectibility, right?
Yes.
I can live, I can sort of alienate myself.
Jordan, you're cutting out. Can't hear you.
Why is that happening? Why would that be? I can't imagine why that would be happening. Is it getting too loud?
No, it's not too loud. It's perfectly volume, and then you just, without any kind of predictor, you just fall silent.
It's very, very weird. I don't understand why that would be.
It might be nothing on your machine or mine. It might just be
okay.
Zoom. I'm getting people, it might be just apocryphal or conspiracy theory bullshit, but people are saying they're getting a sense that Zoom is under stress. I don't know if that's a thing or not.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me at just a purely technical level that they probably did not budget for the amount of usage that it's getting.
I imagine that's true. So you were about to explain the problematic of, right, that, and I want to get into the motivation, right, and the functionality. Why did people replace recovery with a dichotomy? Why did they replace recovery with a dichotomy? And why did they want, like, I have some ideas.
Let's make it real practical.
Pardon me?
I want to make it real practical, but first I want to make it very practical.
Okay.
I think we can actually, by starting at the practical, I think we can get a long way. And then maybe just a little bit, maybe this may not be helpful, but let me ground the example of my daughter.
Yeah.
Because the imaginal is there. It's in that moment.
That's right. It is.
But it's very practical.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, what's the next moment? Because the next moment is at the moment that I'm in. The next moment is strictly imaginal.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Right? That is in some sense, the essence of the imaginal. The meaningfulness of the imaginal is, in fact, its orientation along the vector of time. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. The imaginal is meaningful to the degree to which it allows us to seek or to make choices that will cause the moment that comes to be a better moment. Right. Yes. So we imagine ourselves. And so what I would say is the problem, or part of the challenge, is something like, so very, very practical. I'm sitting in industrial squalor. The river that runs next to my apartment is filled with industrial waste and sewage. There's a dirty train going by my apartment, and I'm reading Walt Whitman. Right. Yeah. So in my mind, in my imagination, I can go to a place that is very much deeply beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I yearn for that place. And then I turn to my actual real context, and I can think of no way to move from here to there.
This is good. This is excellent. The practicality of this is bang on. And that really, what it does is it invokes the distinction between the imaginary and the imaginal. The imaginary is that which allows you to prehend a possible reality in a viable manner. Whereas the imaginary is just in your head. The imaginal is like, the image allows me to prehend the world such that it discloses itself to me in a new and appropriate fashion. Is that the point you're making?
Because that's the point I'm making. Yeah, exactly. And if I'm demoralized, if I just really cannot find an imaginal path from where I am to anything vaguely like this thing that I can hold in imagination, it becomes sort of very, very seductive to disassociate, right? And to separate the faculty that is the imaginal faculty into the imaginary, and to live more and more in that place. This is very closely tied to that thing called spiritual bypass.
Yeah, it's the spiritual bypassing. I was going to say that's very good. I like that. That's convergent, I think, with what I was going to say, but I like the way we've started out at the very practicality, because it then brings up the issue of right. And you see this in Goethe, right? And you see that Schlegel, we are the finite, always longing for the infinite, right? The longing, right? And Blake's ability to see a world in a grain of sand, so for them, there's a distinction also between images that are in your head, which really tempt you to otherworldliness. So compare the difference between you imagining in your head and an actor or a child pretending, right, to do a role. And that actually trains them for the world. They can interact. And so that's what I was trying to get at with an augmented reality, the augmented reality version of the imaginal. It's the images that we, don't read too much into this, that we can successfully project onto the world in pretense, so that we do actually prehend the world in a new and vibrant and vital manner. Is that like what we're pointing to right now?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's so that's one piece, right? And the severing of that, right? The like that pop,
yeah,
where the two worlds separate, and then this becomes a distraction from this,
Yeah.
And this therefore now becomes more and more adrift into the profane, right?
Yes.
And I'm just like, I have a visual image of like a cup of Coke,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like super salience, like this notion of the salient replacing the relevant.
Yeah.
And bullshitting yourself. Like these are all things that happen when we kind of reach a point where our ability to hold these two pieces together breaks. And I've experienced this a lot over just in the past couple of weeks, which is we're a really tough bind right now, because there's like three things that are going on simultaneously that are challenging. One is that our faculty for the imaginary and the imaginal is tremendous. You know,
Yes.
we can generate simulated worlds of incredible vision
Yeah.
and of incredible realization, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've been trained that way now. So our capacity to operate in the fantastical is probably the strongest of any humans ever.
Yes. Yes.
But we're actually quite weak, right? We are highly, highly, highly addicted to avoiding suffering in the positive sense. Right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Just a little bit of pain or fear or threat, and our tendency is to, fuck that. I'm going to go to Twitter and scroll or watch a TV show or have a chocolate.
Yeah.
Ways to avoid doing the work. And then the third is that the actual reality is that the profaning of the world has been going on at a breakneck pace with an extraordinary level of power for a very long time.
Yes.
So if you actually sit with the reality of the distance between what we can imagine and what we're actually dealing with, and our own capacity to choose to step into responsibility for closing that gap, it's hard. And so we end up, and by the way, this is, let me just throw one other piece in here. This is really important. One of the challenges that I've had a lot over the past decade is, it's actually funny. It's so funny that things like the socialism, the Fabian Society, and science fiction, like literally, can't remember his name, not Huxley, but Wells, or the guy who did Rocket to the Moon and stuff like that, Jules Verne.
Jules Verne.
They're connected.
Yep. Yep.
Right. And the point is, like, there's actually a giant dose of the imaginary, a story well told,
Right.
and not the imaginal in that sub community. Like, it's like, I get it. You really do feel like you can see it. You can see this beautiful place that we could get to.
Yeah.
And you can even tell a pretty good story of how we get there and design a cool machine and schema and social context and engines and economic models, but they're not grounded. And so therefore they're in fact not going to move us from here to there, but rather will actually just get us in trouble. They'll get us out of our place. And so there's like a bunch of different challenges going on. Is how do we move to a place where we are grounded? So this is why when I give my examples of the sacred, I feel like I want to make them very simple and very practical, and then like remoralize, moving slowly. Like, okay, can we kind of tune this system back up? Can we relearn? And then as we do, we actually become in ourselves, like as we are able to be more careful and take more care of those things wherever we happen to be, which is find anything that just feels like it's in that direction, and then learn how to treat it well. And notice how your own skillfulness of discovering that becomes more enriched, and then turn that to the next. I'm kind of like, I was in a conversation about a week ago that was talking about Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And there was frustration, not really frustration, it was funny. It was actually, I'll describe it. I will psychologize this, and I'm putting a red flag, just like you did earlier. There was a story that equated his ethos with this spiritual bypass.
Yep.
The idea of working in the interior is a closed loop.
Yep.
And you clean your room and then don't do any fucking thing else. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And maybe so. And if so, fuck that. All right. So I certainly don't hold that. And I don't think it's necessary, but I don't think he does either. But it's, the proposition is like, there's a movement, but the movement begins where you are, and then it proceeds step by step with a sort of a breathing in and a breathing out of an increasing wholeness and integrity, increasing skillfulness and capacity, and like the conversation we're having right now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I am not in my own universe right now. We are creating a shared reality that is doing this thing. Like we are in a sacred space. We are
Yes.
sacralizing. We are sacralizing each other. We are sacralizing the
Yep.
world in this conversation. And the more people who participate in that conversation, the more care and capacity we have as a whole, as a population, as a species, ideally, to take care of the world so that the world can take care of us. And so but there needs to be continuity. There actually has to be an actual movement of imaginal capacity. I cannot if I replace an imaginary narrative, if I replace a propositional schema that it doesn't actually have continuity of agency, real capacity to really make the connection from here to there practical, like in simple step-by-step fashion, then I can lose myself in that shift. Maybe that's actually what happened in the supernaturalization. I can tell you a great story, blow your mind, and disempower you radically.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and I've just there's so much I want to say. So I share with you the idea that we have to recover it in the guts and grits of our life, and I mean what you just described, and you even used it, is the whole Dialogos project.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's a proposal I want to make. The one place where we still have to use the imaginal rather than the imaginary is taking the other person's perspective in genuine dialogue.
That's perfect. Yeah, exactly. Because there's a quick checksum.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
If
And
I
if I don't,
project on top of you, if I use my imaginary to project on top of you, and I'm
exactly.
in relationship with you, I will discover quite quickly that I've not done something real.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. And the dialogos is that thing, that second person thing that can emerge, that we can both cultivate the virtue of reverence towards, the virtue of reverence. So this is how, in my mind, the Dialogos project is working. It's allowing people to do the enacted imaginal, right? Because if we can't, like, and people can't, I mean, terrific narcissism, people that are only projecting, they right, people that are get into purely adversarial thing, they lose the imaginal ability to internalize, look at the language, right, the other person's perspective in genuine reciprocally opening dialogue. And dialogos is to try and recover all of that, and thereby recover the very thing you're talking about, right? That we can actually recover, like, and the way the people in these practices fall in to imaginal, symbolic, religious language, regardless of their doctrinal background. To me, that was the thing that most impressed me about. Here's where we can really find that, what you see, I'm excited because that's exactly, I totally agree. If we try and say, here's my big overarching system and theory, right? And people are just going to turn, they could, even if they believe it, they might just turn it into another imaginary, right? But if we can get something like that does this, right, in something that, like, it's a version of the imaginal and the continuity of contact and the reciprocal opening and the experience of the second personhood of the logos. Now I'm even talking the language of the Trinity, right? Right. Really, really, I think is our best. Well, to me, I'm being too strong because I'm excited and I'm happy, but take it as given from that, not from a position of absolute authority or any ridiculous claim like that. But to me, it seems like that's the best place to get what you're talking about. And here's what I want to then say historically about that. When we shifted from dialogical lectio divina to monologue of propositions, the propositional tyranny, and then we go for certainty rather than reverence. We want conviction rather than reverence. And that's when the imaginary starts to spin off. And notice the time, the date, and how it goes with your sense of the world is really shitty, because the world's really shitty at that time because everything's falling apart. There's been the Black Plague. There's been all the controversy in the church. These are times in which people are really questioning the order of the world. That to me makes a very coherent account. But that now brings us hopefully in compassion to people we're in dialogue with, is how do we get them to recover their symbols as imaginal rather than supernatural, if I
All
had
right.
to put it into a sentence.
Yeah, let me throw something in that just came to me, and I think it's related. And the visual image actually had to do with like caring for the soil,
Yeah,
and like the commons is referred to
yeah,
something that we talked about a little while ago.
of course.
Um, I've made this point before, and I think now it can land, which is that I actually tweeted it this morning that that trust is deeper than truth.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and the, and the way and I'll articulate this because I kind of like the conventional scandal of it,
yeah.
that the scientific method, the scientific enterprise, axiomatically requires and assumes a religion,
Yes, yes,
right? It must. And
yes,
what do I
yes,
mean by that? What I mean by that is if people lie to each other routinely, right? If they do not tell the earnest truth to each other, if they do not endeavor to speak honestly about what it is they are actually perceiving in the world, right? If they manipulate the discourse in scientific papers for personal gain or for
yeah,
disruption of the people's capacity, then the scientific enterprise per se simply fails, right? It
yes,
cannot
oh,
work. It
yes,
sits on top of a fundamental assumption of trust. And religio has as sort of its primary object the constitution of the capacity to actually, not the sort of the embeddedness of trust in among people in life. Like it's not like again, it's not faith in a sense of an alienation of something that's not real, but actually faith that is connected, right? Trust
yes.
that is connected. I really trust you because there's a good reason for it. Um, okay, why did that come up in the context that we were
Well,
just
can I
talking
throw
about?
one thing in right now? Because I want to propose the deep connection between what I just said, and Dewey's in my mind here, the deep connection between dialogical democracy and science. Because in order for me to trust you, I have to genuinely internalize you. You have to be intelligibly internalizable, not complete, not perfect. If I think I've consumed the
Hmm.
mystery of you, then I've idolized you. And I'm not
Hmm.
talking about that. I'm talking about the way your care for your daughter is you're already internalizing her, right? And you carry your children around with you all day. That's what I'm talking about. And if there isn't an intelligible internalizability, then I really can't trust you. Then what I do is I replace the trust with propositional contracts that some authority enforces.
Oh man. Okay. Shit. So I don't know if we spent any time on the work that I did in devising this thing called Game A. We did that maybe early in our
Yeah,
conversations.
yeah, yes, yes.
So what was just coming up there was that one of the primary characteristics of Game A, and we can even say like a simple way of putting it is, Game A was the discovery of a particular form of human relationality that produces something that can devour and metabolize indigenous humans,
Right,
right?
right, right, right.
Game A consumes game indigenous.
Yeah,
And one of the characteristics of it is exactly what you just described, right?
right.
If I can instrumentalize other people, right, and I can convert humans into instrumental functions that are subordinated to a formal schema,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
can then be subject, by the way, to things like measurement and
Yeah,
abstract tools like, say, money and accounting and fill in the blank. Any finite schema that I can optimize against, it can be subject to optimization. I can simultaneously radically scale the number of relationships that I can have. I can have 1 million people in my army,
right.
um, and I can coordinate them into a certain like efficient and directed power, which is
Totally.
say really, really good for dominating other humans and dominating nature.
Yep.
But two bad things happen. Well, I mean, you might say in and of itself it's bad, but let's just
Yeah.
one is that I will for sure ultimately destroy nature, and so I will end up with desertification and famine and plague and pestilence. Um, and I am evaporating the meaningfulness. I'm on path to nihilism. Right? I'm,
Yep.
I'm going to
Very much.
break that bind. I'm going to break that continuity of contact.
Yep. Yep.
And so this is like, if you are playing game A, you're doing what I just described,
Hmm.
and you're going to be running the clock forward on the story that we've been describing, which is the profaning of world.
Right.
And the challenge that we face is the challenge of how do we actually enter into something which is a like a shoot, I'm having a hard time holding it right now. There's some sort of social event going on in the room next to me, and it's like disrupting my ability to pay attention. That's funny, actually. It's an interesting, like practical experiment in the conversation that we're having. You know, we have a place, we have an older version of our ability to hold, like with my kids, like I carry my kids with me.
Yeah.
You know, in the Dunbar, inside the Dunbar limit, right? Inside sort of the sort of the indigenous, which is what I mean, is like just the human inheritance of being human. We have a native capacity to hold relationships at that level of intimacy. So we can actually be in sacred relationship with each other.
Yes. Right.
And as I've come to learn, there was a lot, like an actual lot of deliberate practice and technique in sort of what we call indigenous religion to also hold nature in that same relationship.
Yes,
like
very much.
How do you,
very much. Yeah.
Yeah. For obvious reasons, right? Because the separation between humans and nature was very limited.
Yeah.
And so if you made errors, you would learn very quickly.
Yeah.
So you need to hold that integrity high. You know, where we are now, it's a long way down. Like that is not gonna, if we return all the way back to that base case, it'll be a pretty long journey. So the question is, what's the next tone? Right? This is the tone that when I said game B, right? The nation, the envisioning of the imaginal of game B is trying to like find an orienting basis, that reciprocal opening of, okay, what are the steps that will take us from where we are into some new place that has the capacity to live in the sacred, to live in a sacred fashion, with the whole of humanity, right? Not just our Dunbar tribe, and in the relationship with the whole of the world. So therein, that's like a restatement of the problem, but there's something there. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I think that's right. So what I've seen is, I've seen an argument. Well, it's genuine dialogos. It's both an argument and a drama and a movement that's been happening between us, right? So what I've seen unfolding is, okay, we're talking about the reinventio, and then we're moving.
Oh gosh, did I just go long? Is that what happened?
It's time.
Oh, it's time. That's what happened. Sorry, brother. I've got 11 o'clock I've got to do, which is actually named my daughter. So we'll move from talking about it to doing it.
Well, why I propose to you one quick thing. Are we meeting again?
You want to come here?
I want to propose to you that we continue this, that this be part one, and we pick it with part two and part three. Because
next week?
Yeah, next week. Exactly. I want this to be a trilogy, because there's a lot more to, but this idea about, dialogos and entrustment and intelligible internalizability, but how that connects up at a civilization level. That's the problem you've now left us with. And so I'll let you go to your daughter, and it's been great. Take good care.
Consider it, I'm buying 2 tickets. It's going to be a trilogy.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye-bye.